Volume 2 Chapter 17. Click. If there was a word for it, that was what it felt like to Arch, like somebody had opened a locked door in her own mind. The inky blackness she experienced briefly changed and there was only white. Like going from a darkened, windowless room, and stepping out onto the sun itself. Warmth ran through her veins, a comforting caress, and she felt her body begin to strengthen itself. A moment later, she understood. I'm growing stronger. So much stronger. Her muscles felt like they were growing. She felt like she had enough energy to run day and night without pause. And as to the well of mana within her body, it was like somebody had tunneled the well deeper and found a reservoir she hadn't even known existed, then tapped it. She felt the billowing winds that swirled around her body like a tornado, and she felt them slowly fade away, and her body descended back down to the stone floor. When her toes and heels hit the stone, she went down to one knee again. Master. Whatever you've done. It's a miracle. Ainz looked at the console when the process ended. Level cap raised to 27. Actual current level, 21. Max tier, 4. All that untapped exp was applied, I suppose. Good to know. I can get them all the experience they need, then only elevate them as much as I trust them, or until I can be sure I can control them. It was something to think about extensively later. However, he turned his thoughts to what she just said. I've done nothing, or rather, not much, raising her level cap by 10, and it appears I can do it again by another 10 levels for 150,000 coins. So, there's a cost increase, probably proportional, 50% increase per 10 levels. Ainz stepped back from the console to address his new servant. Arch, you are now assigned to Sabos. You will bring your team to be tested for their worth, and others with them. If they fail this test, they will perish. If they don't, they will join you. Master. Arch acknowledged without any hesitation. Sabos, you will take Arch to the arena, have Cocytus use his skill to create monsters to fight, ensure her survival, and keep her strength rising. When she is capable of 5th tier magic, do as Demiurge suggested, and take her to Fluda to set everything in motion. I am going to return to Riastais. Call for me if you need anything. But otherwise, proceed as planned. Oh, and see that the rest of the tomb is informed about the presence of the 2 small humans. Give them a comfortable room and whatever they need. They will be living here for the foreseeable future. Master. Sabos answered, and when Lord Ainz vanished through a gate, he faced Arch to give her his instructions. Sabos was surprised to find her leaping into his arms. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sabos, she cried out and wrapped her arms as tightly around him as she could, and kissed him on his cheek. Madame Fert walked all over the estate looking for them before she said anything. Hour after hour, Quadrica? Eureka. Where are you? She stopped the few remaining servants, and each of them denied any knowledge of the whereabouts of the twins. It wasn't until she returned to their room to see if they might have gone back and taken a nap, that she saw something unexpected that caused her heartbeat to pick up just a bit. The butler was overseeing the reorganizing of their things and storing them into wooden bins usually meant for transportation. Jim, what are you doing? She asked a little more urgently than she intended to. Her fingers closed over the hem of her green flowing dress, and held it tight, hoping for a benign answer like, deep cleaning their room, but what she got was more banal. Sir Fert ordered us to pack up their things to sell, my lady, I assume because of his new loan. J.M. replied, and Madame Fert felt something deeply wrong. She gave a curt nod, said nothing more, and rushed to the main room where her husband spent most of his time. As she expected from the words of J.M., he was there looking over a pile of coins, and a merchant stood on hand, a merchant they both knew as a premier art dealer. We'll have new lamps coming soon, only 15 gold, but that's a few months away yet. For now, we have this marvelous painting, it's called Sayat and the Shield. He waved a hand over to a magnificent piece of a coastline where a bright green flag fluttered over a tower. A dark-haired figure in a cloak as green as the flag, held a shield out defiantly while a beast woman, a raccoon girl, embraced him. It'll be 12 gold pieces, the merchant said, and Sir Fert pushed 12 over to him. Madame Fert watched the slow way the coins moved over the table. The merchant swept them into hand. Accompanying him was a junior of a noble house that had been recently elevated by the bloody emperor, Flemel's son, an idiot. She recalled reflexively and waited with patience while her husband made small talk with the pair. The merchant left, and the young noble chatted in idleness for a bit, tendering a potential invite to an upcoming party that the Furt house could attend if everything goes well. It never goes well. But he always thinks it will. Madame Furt cursed mentally, but held herself aloof but for a brief greeting until the nobleman left. When they were alone, Madame Furt asked her husband directly, "Why are we packing up and selling Quadrica and Eureka's things for sale? Are you buying them new things, and for that matter, where are our girls? I've been all over the estate, and I can't find them. They were taken away this morning." Sir Furt answered. His wife's face began to go pale, and he jumped ahead of her thoughts. "I had to let Senek take them. He was going to call in our debt and not lend us any more. But we're close. Today proves it. I gave them to him for sale in exchange for a payment, since your daughter failed to perform her duties, and still hasn't returned with more money. I had to offer something. They were all he would take. So I gave him Quadrica and Eureka in exchange for the current payment and another 100 gold coin loan. But look." He pointed to the painting that was leaning up against the wall waiting to be hung. "I had the good luck to buy that. And Flemel's son saw me do it. That will surely get us an invitation to a ball. We'll get our good name back." Madame Furt's heart skipped a beat. "We'll get everything we deserve again. And everything will go back to being how it was." Sir Furt put his hands on her arms, holding her up when he sensed she might collapse where she stood. "They won't be slaves for long. We'll quietly buy them back. Hopefully they won't be too damaged to marry, but even if they are, you're still young, you can give me more." Sir Furt's words flowed like a roaring river and the noise deafened his wife. She didn't want to imagine her girls on the auction blocks. Those were miserable places even with the Emperor's reforms, and they were soft, sweet girls. They would never survive whatever someone wanting to buy two little girls might do with them. Her thoughts turned to Arch, gone off on her job. She doesn't know yet, but she'd never forgive this. She'll. No, I'll. My little Cuckoo. My Rari. Sold. Sold. He sold them so he could. Madame Furt tried to hate him, but as he babbled on about the opportunities coming his way from this, she only saw a reflection of herself. She steeled her heart, gave him a little smile, and straightened up. "Forgive me, husband, I'm a little light-headed. Of course you're right, this will be a fine opportunity. It was worth it, and they're just doing what needs to be done for the family, just like you." She smiled through her words and his hands fell away from her arms when she steadied and echoed his sentiments. "Why don't we have some wine and relax? Without Quadrica, Eureka, and Arch around, there's nothing in between us and what we want to do for a while," she proposed, and taking his hand, she led him away from the pile of coins on the table. Volume 2 Chapter 18. Sir Furt never had much tolerance for alcohol, and under the constant praise and encouragement of his wife, he continued to consume more, and more, and more. He staggered towards his wife, his fingers drunkenly pawing at her dress. "Lesh do it, lesh make Canada. A better yoon than your failed slut." He spat and touched the cheek Arch slapped. The mark from her final slap was covered with makeup, but it was there and so was the memory. "After I get my title back, I'll disinherit her, ungrateful girl. I raised her all those years and what does she do? Threaten to cut the family off? What does she think a family is for?" The mental curses were clearer than his fumbled words, but the anger made him more receptive to his wife's charm and to the alcohol she kept offering him. "Yes, you're such a great man, you can have one more, right?" She teased and showed a little skin to him, and the room began to get all spinny. "Oh, not to worry, husband," his wife said with abundant charm and a tap on his cheek. "Let me get you to bed, we can do all kinds of things there." He gave a slow nod and looked up with a lecherous smile on his face and a little drool slipped down into his blonde beard. "Okay," he muttered and let her take him to bed. She flopped him into place on his back. "I'll return in just a moment, I just have to get ready," she said in the sultry way she always did, and he promptly fell to snoring before the door shut behind her. Madame Furt rushed to the main room and found the pile of coins still sitting where her husband left them. She went to the silk rope and began to yank it. This pull would ring almost every servant bell in the house, including every bedroom. They had few servants anymore, but the Madame Furt wanted them all. She kept yanking on the bell while tears ran down her cheeks. It took quite some time, almost an hour, or so it felt, until they began to arrive, a few butlers, maids, and a single footman for the carriage they retained. They were dressed in service clothing, the cause of their delay, and looked back and forth at one another, uncertain of why they had all been gathered, and even more profoundly confused about why the madam of the house stood weeping shamelessly in front of them. Madame Fert sniffed hard, wiped her nose violently and crudely with her sleeve, and then said what was as unthinkable as her actions, "This house is over." "Madame," J.M. said, taking a step forward. She stopped him dead, raising a hand up to call him to a halt. "Arch will never give anything to this house again. And my husband has sold Quadrica and Eureka. They're gone, probably sold off already or being transported to wherever they will be. The House of Fert has no heirs now." She pointed to the coins on the table. Her words were cold as ice and filled with hate that was rivaled in its thickness only by her sorrowful face. "Divide that among yourselves as your severance. It should be enough to live for a long, long time, until you can find employment somewhere else. In addition, you can take whatever you can carry out of this house in the morning, go sell it. Call that a bonus. I ask for only 3 things from you all in return. My last requests as the madam of the House of Fert." The horror of learning that the little girls they'd watched grow up, had in fact been sold by the man they worked for, was sinking in, and more than one pathetic, pitying look was in place. 2 of the maids had teary eyes, and they were not alone. It was obvious why. The chance of finding 2 small girls in the auction system that spread out all over Baharuth was exceptionally low. "The first thing I ask is that if any of you ever find my girls, please buy them and look after them like they were your daughters. They shouldn't have to suffer because of their stupid parents." The madam swallowed a lump in her throat, then carried on. "The second thing I ask, is that you tell workers to pass on to Arch, when she returns I mean, that I had nothing to do with their sale. I didn't want that, I didn't know he'd done it. She'll hate me anyway, but for the right reasons at least." "And, the third, madam?" J.M. pressed, having a sinking feeling about what she wanted. "Pour alcohol, pitch, and anything burnable all over this house. Spend all night getting ready. My husband won't wake up, he's very drunk. I want this place ready to turn into hell by morning. Take whatever you want, including the carriage. I'll even sign documents turning over anything you can carry, if only you'll also carry out my final wishes." Madame Fert said and sat at the table in front of the coins. For a long time nobody said anything, until J.M. did. "Yes, madam, we'll do what you want." That galvanized the remaining servants to work, and all night long they worked, laying out papers and tearing down curtains to prepare to use for fuel, soaking them in alcohol and laying them in strips to better spread the flame. The only sheets that weren't in use were those on which Sir Fert lay sleeping. And while he slept, Madame Fert filled out an inventory of taken items and signed them over to the servant who expressed a desire for them. Silver forks, spoons, knives, plates, all manner of easily portable materials were shoved into packs and then labeled and shoved into the carriage that would take the last servants of the House of Fert away. Dawn was just breaking when the last of the preparations were made, and she looked over the few faces of the faithful servants. They were clearly tired from lack of sleep, but they also wore faces of pity, sorrow, or anger all their own. One by one, Madame Fert extended the signed paper over to each servant, and thanked them by name. "Jim," she said and embraced him, looking up into the careworn eyes of the middle-aged servant, "I barely knew a life without you. I hope you find a good house to serve in again, and don't think too harshly of me, even if I do deserve it." Liel, she embraced the maid and slipped the rolled paper into the young woman's hand. "You weren't with us as long as J.M., but you worked hard. There's a good recommendation for you, just like for the rest. Thank you for everything." So it went, until it was all done. "Now, get going, all of you," Madame Fert commanded. "Madame. What about you?" J.M. asked as they briefly hesitated to leave. "I'm leaving my husband, of course," she said, and pointed toward the door. "Just leave a candle lit for me so I can set the fire in a little while." They vanished out the door, one by one, leaving the last click to be like the clap of thunderous doom to the woman who stood alone. On a whim, Madame Fert took the painting and hung it up on the wall, admiring it briefly. "It really is a fantastic piece of artwork, a shame nobody will ever see it again." She then went back to her bedroom. Her husband was still asleep and snoring in a drunken stupor. She went to the bedside table and yanked open the drawer. Every noblewoman kept a dagger at hand in her bedroom to spare herself from being disgraced if an invasion should threaten to overthrow them. Madame Fert was the same as any other in that respect, and like other women who took that seriously, she kept her dagger sharp. She drew it from its simple leather sheath and went over to where her husband slept. Conveniently enough, he'd rolled over onto his belly at some point. She set the dagger down, pulled off the shoes and socks that covered his ankles, then took the knife up. It took only a moment. I'm no warrior, but maybe Arch would praise me for this, she thought with savage pleasure as the bright blood spurted and her husband screamed when she slashed the tendons of his ankles. That woke him up. The snores were gone and the screaming went on in earnest. He howled and howled like a stuck pig and turned desperate to see who attacked him. Madame Fert looked down at him with disgust and hatred, and he stared up at her in turn with eyes empty of any understanding. Answering the question he couldn't ask through screams, she shrieked like a banshee at him. You sold my children. You bastard. You took them. You took them away. They were our future. They were our future and you destroyed it all. She shrieked it and slashed her knife down again as he flailed. Sometimes she hit the tendons, sometimes not, but he wasn't going to be walking. He rolled away, desperately trying to escape her, and fell with a thud that brought a whimper with it. Arch's wish will come true. You just wait though, you unmitigated bastard. She shrieked and kicked him hard in the gut, then brought her foot up when he hugged his belly, and brought her heel down on his kidney. He yowled again like the stuck pig she now saw him to be. She then strode toward the door, leaving him shaking in pain and briefly too paralyzed to move. She took the candle left burning on the table, then lowered it to a soaked strip of cloth that lay on the floor and ran to other piles of burnable and alcohol-soaked materials. The flames roared to life and the heat and smoke began to fill the room. She watched the line of flame rush down the long ropes once used to summon servants. She watched it catch torn curtains and watched it catch strips of blanket, cotton, torn up furniture bits, and watched it vanish. They probably couldn't get it to run everywhere in the manor, not even if they tore up every page of every book to use for fuel. But it'll get enough, she thought, and returned to her room. There weren't burning materials laid to that place, and there weren't, for a reason. Madame Fert flung open the door to find her husband scratching at the wood, trying to get it open, and without any hint of mercy, she planted a kickful into his face, shattering his nose and forcing several teeth down his throat. He struggled further, gurgling out protests when she went behind him, grabbed the blonde hair she once found so attractive, and began to drag him back into the bedroom. From where he lay, he could see beneath the door to the beginnings of fire. Wah! He tried to say, but she answered before he could finish. Fire. The house is on fire. I had the servants get the entire home ready to burn, she said, approaching her wardrobe. We've got a few minutes to go before it spreads here, but it won't be long. Madame Fert tore off her expensive clothing and tossed it over his body, concealing herself briefly while she changed into a simple riding outfit, long out of fashion with the rich. It had become very common clothing. The servants all think I'm going to be dying in here with you. I told them I was leaving you, and I think they simply assumed I was going to die a little later. Madame Fert said and spat in his direction. I gave it a lot of thought, she said to the writhing figure on the floor while she yanked up her pants and slid on a belt. I was going to do that, at first, but Quudrika and Eureka are out there somewhere, hopefully not suffering, and I owe it to them to try to do what our daughter was doing the whole time. Protecting them. From you. You owe it to your daughters to do what Arch said. Madame Fert's words were as icy as the spreading flames were hot, and tendrils of smoke began to come through the crack in the door. Get me out, he gasped. You're my wife. He whimpered. You. Duty. Me. He couldn't form a proper sentence, but he began crawling toward his wife. Not anymore, Madame Fert said, and spat on him. There, that glob of spit on your face will put out a little fire. That was my last duty. Now do what Arch said, and go die in a fire. She sat on the bed and yanked on low boots suitable for walking. What you do? Without my name. He seethed as he struggled to mouth simple words. Fert is a dead name. Worthless trash. I'll go to work. I don't care at what. I'll dig holes, I'll be a prostitute, I'll teach music, maybe even be a merchant. I'll do whatever I have to in order to find them again. I'll buy them back, and spend my life begging their forgiveness for letting them stay where you could use them, you unimaginable bastard. The smoke was beginning to billow thickly under the door, It hit the ceiling and began to fill the room from the top down, closing inch by inch on a man whose wounds kept him safe from the smoke for as long as possible. She yanked a small traveling pack from out of her wardrobe and threw a few more small things into it that might be useful, then slung it onto her back. Here is a bonus for all my years of faithful marriage to my noble husband," Madame Fert said, and spat on his face twice more. The first flames were making their way rapidly under the door. The sound of crashing and cracking was becoming like a roar. "Don't leave me," he cried out, desperately clawing after the Madame Fert as she went toward the window. "Go die in a fire." She reiterated her words, and smashing the window open, she jumped out to land in the grass. She remained long enough to hear the first horrific screams of her husband's still hungover, agonized body as the flames began to cover him and the smoke began to choke his lungs, and then stepped away to watch as the manor started to collapse. A crowd was gathering which she easily slipped into, and watched as the wing where the library was suddenly caved in, and the roaring red flames picked up high enough to be seen licking at the sky. She watched until the wing where her husband lay dying gave way and covered his corpse or ended his life. Then with that, the Madame Fert slipped away to disappear, never to return again. Volume 2 Chapter 19. Ines spent the next few days going back and forth between the capital of Riestais and the arena of Nazarick, checking on the progress of his newest servant. Arriving well before he needed to, meant he only had to send a notification to the palace and was ready to present himself at need, and since no word came right away, there was drinking with Blue Rose and the other adventurers, until Luku pretended to be quite drunk. Always after Gagran passed out, and then helping her to her room before gating himself out. "I swear, I know I promised to pay for beer for her for a full year, but isn't this a little bit excessive?" Evil Eye asked and slapped a few silvers down on the table again. Gagran gave her a silly grin. Her head was laying on the table, face turned to one side and looking up glassy-eyed at her sister. "Oh shoosh, you should be grateful I buy Lupu drinks, meanin' you buy her drinks, meanin' Mishta Moman keeps comin' back." The giant woman grinned stupidly and raised a shaky finger. "I'm actually making a great sacrifice for my shishtish happiness. Hick. Though how shat woman drinks show mush with that little body. It must go to her boobsh. Hick. Gonna sleep now. Bye-bye." Gagran promptly closed her eyes and began to snore at the table. "Draw lots to carry her to her room?" Evil Eye proposed. "Evil Boss can do it," Tia suggested. "Yes, Evil Boss," Tina agreed, and the twins immediately vanished from sight. Maybe it should be me?" Evil Eye proposed under the steady eye of the cross-armed Lakeyus. "Yes, maybe it should." Lakeyus tried to stifle her laugh when sliding out of the booth, and mostly failed. "Well, I got to spend hours with Sir Moman, so it was worth it." Evil Eye acknowledged and began to heave the meathead onto her back, though the giant of a woman was dragged from the knees back. For the vampire caster, the woman's weight was still nothing, and so she hauled her off to bed. "How is she performing, Sabos?" Ines asked his butler during a spare moment between sessions. The sand kicked up at his feet as the Lord of Nazarick trod over it, and Sabos knelt when his master came near. Arch did the same, her head deeply bowed and forearm resting on one knee while the other was bent in the sands. Sabos answered with great humility, or so it seemed to Arch's ears. "Adequately, my lord. Arch has risen 3 levels by Cocytus's estimation. I have been pitting her against summoned elementals and allowing her to deal the final blow to each after I weakened them. Actual elementals, powerful creatures on a worse than national disaster level, dispatched like mere goblins by Master Sabos, and left helpless for me to finish off. And somehow?" Arch suppressed the urge to look down at her hands. She'd looked at them often enough and noted nothing different. Yet the sense of it was there. If what Sabos said was accurate, and he is not going to lie for me. She understood that, clearly. I have somehow gained years' worth of progress, and had my limits pressed beyond all reason from only a year ago, and in barely a week. If I doubted it before, I don't now. My new master, Master Sabos' own lord, is a god, the god Master Paradine seeks. Arch shivered with excitement under the gaze of the Master of Nazarick. She felt his penetrating dark eyes fall to her. "Are you well, Arch? Have your needs been met?" Her heart pounded beneath the towering figure. "Master, you have given me everything I asked for. And I am grateful. Lord Zora and Mare established a little cabin for me by the lake on their floor, and Lord Mayor allows my sisters to borrow books to read. Yes, we'll have to do something about that too, won't we? Ines muttered and stroked his chin. Arch felt her blood run cold. Master, if it was wrong for them to borrow books, I promise they didn't do anything bad on purpose. They're good girls. Her breathing became labored as panic began to set in, but her master was looking off to the rows of golems in the stands. No, not that. I was thinking that their education needs to be seen to soon. We can treat the present as a small vacation, but soon they will need proper teachers if they're to become good servants, Ines said in a conversational voice. Say boss, Arch, Ines said, and they responded at the same moment. Yes, master? Fluda Paradine taught the current emperor, did he not? And this emperor is regarded as the greatest in their history? Ines asked. Yes, my lord. Arch replied without a doubt. Then he should be acquired. We will use him as a tutor to your sisters, Ines said, and leveled his finger down to Arch. The finger was only inches away from her forehead, but her eyes locked on the tip like it had descended from a divine realm. Her pulse thrummed and heart raged in a torrent of rising loyalty as her sisters were handed the brightest of all possible futures. Master, I gave you my oath already. I am yours many, many times over, but if I could offer it again, I would be grateful, Arch said through tears that blurred her vision of her god. Many oaths mean nothing, mean the one you give, that will be enough. Ines uttered the command and she engraved it on her heart. Everything about him sang of power and nobility, divinity given flesh, and struck dumb, she could only bow her head to him again. Is there any position I should prepare them for, my lord? They are young, but if you have plotted out their lives already? Sabos asked, then stopped when Ines denied it. No, let's see where their talents take them. Perhaps they share Archer's talent for magic, or perhaps they're better suited to the sword, or trade. Prepare them for anything, until they know what they need exactly. Ines ordered crisply. As you command, my lord. Sabos responded. Resume your practice then. I will return in a few days. And when I do, tell. Ines took a deep, slow breath. Please don't let me have to fight them. He briefly thought, and added, Mayor and Aura to meet me here alone. As you wish, my lord. Sabos answered, and the pair of servants waited until their master stepped through a gate and was gone again. Only after that did they slowly rise from the warm sands of the arena to stand erect again. Such is the Lord we serve. Now redouble your efforts, Arch, you must be worthy soon. Master, Arch said and gritted her teeth. Anything for Lord Ines, please. When Cocytus returns, have him call forth the most dangerous monster he can. I'll take the risk if it will help me grow faster. Such a beast creates terrible fear, Sabos cautioned Arch. It will be worth it, she said through a determined grinding jaw. As you wish, Sabos said as Cocytus made his way over to them again. Hours later, Ines and Lupa were cantering up to the palace on their horses. The constant clip-clop noise of hooves was now a comfortably familiar sound to Ines himself, and Lupus Regina as per usual, seemed to be just plain chipper. She was humming a delighted tune with a smile on her face and long red braids dancing behind her as if it were keeping to the music of her hum. They arrived at the palace of the king, and leapt down from their horses with practiced unity. Ines, in his guise as Moman, kept his twin greatswords on his back, red cloak fluttering in the breeze, a contrast to the practical traveling equipment of Lupus Regina. She had chosen a variation on her battle-made outfit, wearing a black and white dress slit at the thighs that was tight at the belly and up, emphasizing her figure but granting her full freedom of movement, and atop her head she wore a simple cap similar in design to that of her maid uniform. At her side she had her enchanted mace, and on her face was the deadliest weapon a beautiful girl could wield against the unwary. A smile. She disarmed the guards with a glance, their stiff postures relaxed as all stiffness was redirected from their backs to another part of their bodies. Moman and Lupo of Axel, here to present ourselves to His Majesty, King Ramposa III, Ines said, and the guards almost fell over themselves to rush to the door. It swung wide enough with the urgency of their action to admit 4 people with ease, and Axel strode through the door and down the long stone hall leading to the throne room. I can't believe I'm really doing this. He almost laughed at himself. In many ways it was a gamer's dream, in almost every way, it was the dream of those trapped in the hellish world of his birth. If only my friends. If only they were here. Finding them will have to be a top priority when everything is said and done. Ainz promised himself, and quietly recited their names like they were sacred oaths or incantations to steady his pounding heart before he reached the door to the throne room. Announcing Momen and Lupu, Adamantite Adventurer Team Axel. The herald at the door called out, and eyes went to the pair. Adamantite-ranked adventurers were rare, and true to her word, Evil Eye spread the story of their actions all over the capital. Ainz felt his gamer instincts sharp as a knife and clear as clean glass. I'm on the cusp of an event flag, I can feel it. He told himself and, driven by his desire to see it through, he approached the throne and knelt to the king. Lupu at his side did the same, though he noted, a little more stiff than I would have hoped, but still not bad acting. Lupu wore her radiant smile, her bright yellow eyes lightly closed by dark lids, and behind them she had the silent hope. I hope I get the chance to kill everyone here who sees or expects my master to kneel. The daydream of their screams was a pleasant comfort, a stark contrast to the pheromones of desire her sharp nose caught from the male eyes that raked over her body. Your Majesty, Ainz said with a bow of his head beneath the helmet. Up close, the king looked like what he expected an old warrior monarch to look like. Loose white hair that hung neck-length, piercing, steady eyes, and a strong-looking body that had yet to go to fat. Momen, Lupu, welcome to the capital. We are pleased with your coming, and with your steadfast efforts at the protection of our people. The king bore a noble voice of his own, and it rebounded from the far stone walls. We permit you to rise. In thanks to your efforts, per our invitation, we will be holding a feast for you and your companion beginning this evening. Quarters will be provided for you and your lovely companion, so indulge yourself to your heart's content. The king finished speaking, then clapped his hands, and a young boy clad in red and golden clothing stepped forward from where he waited at the wall. See them to their rooms, give them a tour of the palace if they so desire, the feast will begin at sunset. The king said, and the young golden-haired boy bowed and went to where the heroes stood, then led them away. Out of sight of the court, the boy asked them, would you care for a tour, masters, or would you like to go straight to your room? Quarters will be fine, Ainz said with indifference, biding his time until the servant deposited them at a door. Pull the rope if you require service, sir, ma'am, he said and bowed deeply at the waist, holding the position until Momen and Lupu had gone in and closed the door. Alone, Lupus Regina quickly asked, that was abrupt, wasn't it? She scratched her head with a sharp, sweeping gesture of her hand running through the hair at her scalp. I was expecting some big speech or something. And what was with the plural speech? He got another voice in his head other than his own? He is a king. A king is more than one person, he speaks for the entire kingdom. And this was just a greeting, Ainz explained, no doubt he'll say more at the banquet itself. We can expect to be privately approached for work later. Though his voice was calm, his skin was a tingle with excitement that still lingered beyond the recent events. Lupus Regina absorbed his words and privately committed them to memory when she went to sit on the bed. She wore a troubled look, darting glances at her lord while he perused the bookshelves. Ainz could feel her stares. Ask whatever it is, Lupus Regina. He finally said. Master, when will you tell the others? She asked, and he stiffened. You haven't told anyone in a while, not even Entomar, or CZ, or even Yuri. Forgive my asking, it's not my place to say, but... Lupus Regina looked down at the stone and kicked her feet back and forth against the wooden frame of the bed in a nervous gesture. I worry about you. Loyalty. A treasured thing. Ainz thought, and almost dismissed the question before he chose to answer it. I'll be telling Merendora next. Sabos has already been informed of my intent. Lupus Regina gave a tiny series of rapid nods. Lord Mayor will absolutely side with you, Master. Lady Aura? Maybe, I believe so. You sound confident. Ainz answered and stood up, dismissing the contents of the shelf as no longer interesting. I am. Neither guardian hates humans, and they're only children. But children can do the unexpected. If either did dare reject you, it would be Lady Aura. Lupus Regina offered her appraisal, and Ainz took it seriously. A battlemaid is meant to assess threats well to ensure they can delay even where they can't triumph. I would be a fool to reject her opinion because it is undesirable. Ainz acknowledged privately, and said nothing. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Sir Momen, Lady Lupu, time we've come to have you dressed for the evening. Enter. Ainz acknowledged, and allowed a pair of young women to enter and lead Lupu away. She glanced back at him, her lingering wide yellow eyes asking, searching. He nodded. I can manage by myself through this at least. She allowed herself to be taken away. The two men who entered to work on him immediately, and true to the nature of service people who had a long task to perform with a customer, they were chatterboxes. And that was just for starters. A slender little man stood on a footstool and measured Daines's arms. The worker's clothing was flamboyant, bright as a peacock's feathers, and a bright feather cap sat on his head. I tell you, Eight Fingers is getting worse. Why, rumor has it they even started using monsters to extort towns for gold, or to keep villagers producing the plant used to make black dust. Oh goodness, how terrible. The other tailor said from down on one knee where he measured Daines's feet. He had a long, high-pitched voice and clucked his tongue several times. Everything from abducting peasants for prostitution, to gambling. What are the guards even doing about it? Nothing, that's what. The conversation went on, and the longer he listened, the more he had his doubts about the authenticity of the conversation. This is strangely focused. Ines considered it and recalled a movie from his own world. A spy film. The character was prompted to action by information he learned in an unrelated manner. He was more open to act when the option was presented, precisely because there wasn't an attempt to convince him on the spot, only to present him with information in an unguarded moment that he would later recall when the moment of decision came. They are plants. The king here is no fool, he's not taking the chance on my refusal. I'll have to remember his application of this strategy myself for later. Not to worry, Majesty, I have no intention of refusing your request. Ines suppressed his laughter, and used the opportunity to probe the agent tailors further with questions of his own. Is the drug trade really that pervasive? Ines asked. Unfortunately, yes. Poorer nobles grow the plant they use for it instead of wheat. It makes crops more expensive and the wealth gets hoarded by alley lords. Eight Fingers has some powerful fighters too, so ordinary guards can't stop them. The tailor at his back responded readily, now my good man, this will only take a few minutes more, and we'll have some clothing made ready for you in no time. You can alter clothing so quickly? Ines asked with sudden intrigue. High-pitched laughter came from both tailors. Oh my no, but we can do cheap enchantments that create temporary alterations, typically for a day or two. Permanent or automatic ones are just not worth the cost for single use, but this will do nicely. Trust us, Dark Hero. We leave you to adventure, but this is the battlefield of the fashion world, where we are gods. The higher-pitch-voiced little man at Ines's back spoke with such passionate enthusiasm for his craft that it was difficult not to trust that he knew what he was doing. As you wish. Ines answered, and they scribbled down numbers, measurements, and concepts, only to quickly retreat from the room. Hey there, neighbor, Solution said to the blonde young man in casual, but decent clothing. She looked him over from behind. He wore a blue sash and a gold and brown vest. He had a shock of fire-red hair amidst the blonde that stood out like a robin's red crest, and had a lean, strong figure. He sat at the bar in front of her chatting in idleness with two of his friends. Solution knew their names immediately. Half-elf, Imina, a ranger, and Robber Dyke, a priest, and of course, Target 1, Hecarim, a fighter. Around Mithril class by adventurous standards. Which to Solution, made them essentially trash. She put her hands on her hips and waited for him to turn around. He spun halfway round on the stool and gave her a sideways look, then appraised her up and down. She kept the cocky smile on her face when his eyes widened at the unexpected beauty. Sorry, you mean me? He asked and pointed at his chest. Yeah, it's about a little friend of yours, you know her I'm sure. Short thing, short blonde hair, magic caster, cheap stuff, two little girls for sisters, ring a bell? Solution asked in a sharp, unyielding, and decidedly unfriendly tone. All three of them tensed up. Arch, yes. I knew her, what's it to you? Hecarim demanded, his own voice growing sharp in response. What would you say if I told you she racked up quite a debt? Solution asked. I'd point to the ruins of the house where you can probably find her bones if you sifted long enough. Arch and her sisters are dead, Hecarim said with bitter revulsion. Solution closed her eyes and folded hands in front of her so that all her fingertips were touching their opposite number, then asked tauntingly, and if they're not? Hecarim's blood ran cold, his eyes went wide. Then, he said, I'll have to ask you to step outside so I can beat you to a pulp. Bad enough she died. You have to mock her memory? Oh, you want to beat me up? How quaint, Solution tittered. Her breasts heaved as the laughter intensified and her ruby lips parted. Fine, I'll tell you the rest from down on the filthy ground. She headed for the door, and all three began to rise. Their own glares said they doubted her just as much. No, no, just me, Hecarim hissed and waved a hand down, telling his team to seat themselves. They did, but with reluctance. He followed the curly-haired blonde woman outside and looked her over more closely. Dressed in a very expensive maid outfit, she moved with smooth and graceful steps that warned him that she'd had some kind of motion-based training. Dance? Or perhaps she really can fight? He wondered as they went behind the building. She was right about one thing, the alley was anything but clean. Caught in the shadow of the nearby building, the last rain left the ground dank and mold grew from discarded food. A slightly bad smell suggested animal waste had been dumped one way or another nearby. In his mind it was the perfect place to teach her a lesson. Hecarim cracked his knuckles from his right hand into his left. Take it back or this will get painful. The blonde put her hands on her hips and stood with her feet shoulder-width apart. She appeared quite open and vulnerable. She tilted her chin up and said, "Make me." Hecarim came on, and the maid was gone. So that is mithril rank. What a waste. Solution thought, and from behind him, she brought her fist around to the back of his head. Hecarim felt the pain of the blow and flew face first into the wall. His teeth, nose, and jaw were broken. You should have started with a martial art. He heard the woman say from behind him, I guess it's not a bad show for you to have survived even that mild strike, but still, sloppy. The footsteps were ominous, and he grunted when he felt his blonde hair grabbed and yanked at the root. He had nothing left to resist with when she flung him away from the wall he was kissing. His body was cracked and bruised when he sailed through a number of old rotted crates and hit the opposite wall with his back. When the noisy crash of breaking wood ended, the maid had more to say. You should always go into every fight like it's going to be lethal. Doing otherwise is just asking to be killed. He looked up at her through bloody eyes and grunted in pain when he felt her hand beneath his jaw, tilting his face up to make sure he saw her. Listen here, your little friend, her little twins, they are alive. And I know where they are. If you want to see them again, I have a job for you. Are you listening? The beauty asked the ruined worker. Hecarim nodded, doing his best to focus. How did she do that? How? What is she talking about? Pain or not, he began to understand the purpose of the stranger's coming. In a few days, you'll get word about a job, a big job needing lots of teams. You're going to be very, very enthusiastic about it, tell lots of stories about how much treasure there is, and lure the most covetous, thieving, worthless trash workers into accepting. And you're going to swear on the life of your comrade not to breathe a word of this. Do you get it? Solution asked. Hecarim tried to nod, but with his head up, he couldn't, so he blinked his bloody eyes. Good, now I don't want to have to repeat myself, so I'll go let your little friends know they can come out here to take care of you. When it comes time for the job, do your best, and when you fail, before you die, ask for mercy. I can promise you, we will spare at least one if we are properly entertained. The woman straightened up and sauntered away, just as Hecarim felt his vision start to blur and he lost sight of her before she rounded the corner, and he passed out completely.